Let's talk about some of the most familiar buildings in the UK, but in a way you've probably never thought about them before. You see them everywhere, right? Village greens, city centers, but it turns out they're hiding a pretty massive secret. Let's get into it. When you look at a church, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's a place of worship, sure, or maybe a beautiful historic landmark, or just that quiet old building on the corner. But that's really just scratching the surface. What if the true value of these buildings isn't in the stone or the stained glass, but in what they're actually doing for all of us? So, what are these places really worth to the country? Not just for the people who go there on a Sunday, but for everybody. Well, thanks to some pretty groundbreaking new research, we can actually put a number on it. And honestly, the number is staggering. 55 billion pounds. And no, that is not a typo. New research, using methods that are actually approved by the UK Treasury, calculates that church buildings provide at least 55 billion in social value every single year. Now, this isn't about property value. It's about the real, tangible good that they bring to society. Okay, so how in the world do you arrive at a number that huge? To understand that, we have to look past the bricks and mortar and see what's really going on inside these buildings. So first things first, this is not about what the building would sell for. It's about what economists call social value, which is just a way of measuring the real-world benefit that things like food banks, youth clubs, and mental health support give to a community. A big report called the House of Good decided to calculate exactly that. The report calls this the halo effect. It's this idea that the positive impact from a church just radiates outwards, It benefits everyone in the community, whether they ever step foot inside for a service or not. Right, so let's break down that massive $55 billion figure. As you can see here, about $2.4 billion of it is what you'd call direct economic value. Jobs, renting out the hall, things you can easily count. But the giant slice of the pie, almost $53 billion, comes from what they call well-being value. This is the stuff that's harder to measure, but has a way bigger impact on people's lives. Community support, volunteering, all of that. So you're probably asking, how do you put a price tag on happiness? Well, believe it or not, the UK Treasury now has an official tool for it. It's called a Welby, and it's basically a unit that measures a real significant boost in someone's satisfaction with their life. And the Treasury says that boost is worth $13,000. This is the key, the absolute game changer that let researchers finally put a monetary value on all that community good that we used to just think was priceless. And this is where the numbers just get wild. The analysis shows that for every single pound invested in keeping a church building up and running, society gets back over 16 pounds in social benefits. I mean, just think about that. That's a phenomenal return on investment, way better than a lot of other government programs. All right, so we've seen the massive national picture. But let's bring it down to a more personal level. What does all this mean for an individual's own well-being? So how does this actually play out in your own life? Well, one fascinating report actually measured this. It found that going to church each week gives you about the same boost to your happiness as playing sports regularly. Pretty cool. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you do both, the benefit doubles. Then if you add volunteering to the mix, which is the absolute lifeblood of these places, you get triple the positive impact. And to really put that into perspective for you, the overall well-being boost from doing all three of those things is basically the same as the jump in life satisfaction an unemployed person gets when they finally find a job. That's not just a little boost, that's a life-changing level of impact, and it's happening quietly in communities all over the country. So that's the effect on one person. Now just try to imagine that scaled up across the entire country. We're talking about a massive, quiet, volunteer-led national network. According to a 2024 report, at least 2 million people a year are directly helped by well-being initiatives run out of churches in the UK. And get this, the people who wrote the report are pretty sure that number is actually a major underestimate. So what does that help actually look like? Well, as you can see from the chart, a lot of it comes from drop-in hubs and different kinds of courses. But what really jumps out is that tiny little slice for young people, just under 3%. That really suggests there might be a big gap in services for one of the most vulnerable groups in our society. But beyond all the numbers and the charts, it's really about the human side of things. This quote from a church leader in Smithwick, it just gets right to the heart of it. These buildings often become these essential safe spaces for their communities. And that feeling is echoed by the people who actually use these services. This quote from someone in Southampton, It shows it's not just about getting help, it's about finding a place where you feel safe and where you feel like people actually care about you. Okay, now this is where the story takes a really critical turn. This chart shows us where all these well-being initiatives are geographically. You can clearly see a lot of them are concentrated in places like the Southeast and the Northwest. Now, just keep that picture in your head as we look at the next slide. Because now, let's compare that to where the need is the greatest. This chart shows the population living with a relatively low income, and boom, the mismatch is just stark. The Southeast, which has a ton of these initiatives, has the lowest percentage of low-income population. Meanwhile, a place like the West Midlands has a much higher need, but we just saw it has fewer initiatives. It reveals this huge disconnect between where the help is and where it's needed most. This all brings us to the final and, frankly, the most crucial part of this story. Because this invaluable social asset, this entire £55 billion network, it is facing a very real and very present danger. The statistics are just sobering. In England alone, 900 places of worship are on the official at-risk register. In Wales, a quarter of historic churches and chapels have closed down in just the last 10 years. A quarter? And the Church of Scotland is making plans to close up to 40% of its buildings. This isn't some problem for the future, it is happening right now. And we have to remember, this entire £55 billion infrastructure of care is powered almost completely by volunteers. It's a grassroots network that gets no guaranteed, stable funding from the government. It's an incredible national asset, but it's also incredibly fragile. So this is the final, crucial question we have to ask. We've got a £55 billion social safety net woven right into the fabric of our communities, and it's run for free by volunteers. If we let it crumble and disappear, what takes its place? What happens then? That's something we all really need to think about.